The message arrived at 1:23 a.m., lighting up the screen of a phone that only rang for million-dollar transactions and carefully orchestrated violence. But this notification was different. "They're hurting my dad. Please help us." Joon-sik Baek, known throughout Seoul's underworld as the Ghost, stared at the broken text on his screen. A child's message. Small fingers typing through terror somewhere in the darkness of this vast city. He should have deleted it. Wrong number. Not his problem. Someone else's nightmare bleeding into his carefully controlled world. Then a second text appeared, weaker, more desperate. "I'm hiding in the closet. There's so much blood. I'm scared." Something ancient stirred in Joon-sik's chest, something he'd buried 15 years ago beneath tailored suits and calculated cruelty. His fingers moved across the screen before his mind could intervene, typing 3 words that would change everything. "I'm coming." Across his penthouse office, his Lieutenant Jinwoo watched in disbelief as the man who once dismantled 3 rival organizations in a single night grabbed his coat and moved toward the elevator with deadly purpose. "Boss, where are you going?" He didn't answer, because somewhere in Seoul, a 7-year-old girl in flower-printed pajamas was waiting for a stranger to keep a promise. And Joon-sik Baek hadn't broken a promise since the night his younger brother died asking him for help. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Joon-sik Baek had built his empire on one simple principle: trust no one, love nothing, feel nothing. For 15 years, he had ruled Seoul's underworld with surgical precision and calculated violence. His name alone could silence a room full of hardened criminals. His reputation had been carved from blood, betrayal, and the kind of methodical brutality that kept weaker men awake at night. But sitting in his black Mercedes, racing through empty streets toward an address he'd never seen, Joon-sik felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. The GPS announced 12 minutes to destination. 12 minutes for a little girl who might not have 12 seconds. His phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with another message that made his chest tighten. "They're yelling at him. I don't understand what they're saying." Then another. "Dad told me to hide no matter what." And finally, the one that made his foot press harder on the accelerator. "He's not answering me anymore." The engine roared through Seoul's quiet neighborhoods as streetlights streaked past like golden bullets. He had driven these same streets countless times before, but never like this. Never with the weight of genuine fear crushing his lungs. 7-year-old Areum Hwan had been asleep when the shouting started. She woke to angry voices coming from the living room, words she couldn't understand mixed with her father's pleading tone. She knew that tone. It was the same one he used when he talked about the money he owed, the debts that kept growing, the men who kept calling with threats. Her father had told her what to do if the bad men ever came. "Hide in your closet, lock the door, and don't come out no matter what you hear." So she did. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, the one her father gave her for emergencies, and ran to her closet. Inside, surrounded by her dresses and school uniforms, she pulled the door closed and turned the small lock. Through the crack at the bottom, she could see shadows moving. She could hear furniture crashing, glass breaking, and her father's voice getting weaker with each passing minute. Areum's hands shook as she unlocked her phone. She didn't know who to call. The police. But her father always said they couldn't help with this kind of trouble. Family? They had no one close by, so she did the only thing her 7-year-old mind could think of. She started texting random numbers from her contact list, numbers she didn't recognize, hoping anyone would answer. Joon-sik wasn't supposed to care about random children texting wrong numbers. He wasn't supposed to care about anything except profit margins and territory expansion. But that night, speeding toward a crisis he couldn't control or manipulate, he found himself remembering things he had spent years trying to forget. 15 years earlier, Joon-sik had been a different person entirely. Back then, he went by his birth name, Baek Junho. He lived in a cramped apartment with his younger brother Minho and their father. They were poor, but they were together. Their father worked multiple jobs while 14-year-old Junho took care of 7-year-old Minho after school. He helped him with homework, made him dinner, and tucked him into bed with stories about brave warriors and rescued kingdoms. Minho had dark curls that bounced when he laughed and a smile that could light up their tiny kitchen on the coldest winter mornings. He believed his big brother could fix anything, solve any problem, chase away any monster. Their mother had died when Minho was born, leaving their father to raise two boys alone in a city that showed no mercy to the weak or the poor. But they managed. They had each other, and for a while, that seemed like enough. Minho was small for his age, with dark eyes that trusted too easily and hands that folded origami cranes with obsessive precision. He would sit at their small kitchen table after school, his tongue poking out in concentration as he transformed colored paper into delicate birds. "Why do you always make cranes?" Junho asked him once. Minho looked up with that innocent smile. "Teacher said cranes represent hope and long life. I'm making them for Dad, so he'll live forever and never leave us like Mom did." Junho's heart had clenched at those words. Their father was already working himself to exhaustion, taking any job he could find to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Medical bills from their mother's final illness had left them drowning in debt, and the interest kept compounding faster than their father could pay. But Junho never told Minho about the debt collectors who called at odd hours, or the threatening letters that arrived in unmarked envelopes, or the way their father's hands shook when he counted their remaining money each month. Minho deserved to believe in hope and long life and the protective power of paper cranes. He deserved to feel safe in their small apartment, to trust that his big brother would always keep the monsters away. Their father, Baek Sung-min, had borrowed money from the wrong people. It started small, just enough to cover the final hospital bills when their mother was dying. But the lenders weren't legitimate banks. They were loan sharks with connections to organized crime, and their interest rates were designed to trap people in perpetual debt. What began as a manageable sum grew into an impossible mountain. Sung-min took on extra shifts at the factory, worked weekends at a convenience store, delivered food late at night. 14-year-old Junho got a part-time job at a local garage, lying about his age to help with expenses. But it was never enough. The loan sharks didn't care about effort or intention. They cared about results, and when the results didn't come, they escalated. First came phone calls, then letters, then visits. Men in expensive suits would appear at their door, speaking in polite tones that barely concealed the violence underneath. "Mr. Baek, we've been very patient, but our patience has limits." Sung-min would bow deeply, apologizing, promising to have the money soon. He would give them whatever cash he had scraped together, buying himself another week, another month. And every time they left, Junho would watch his father's shoulders slump a little more, the weight of impossible debt crushing him slowly. One November evening, Junho was working his part-time job at the garage when his boss called him to the phone. The voice on the other end belonged to a neighbor. There had been an incident at their apartment. Junho needed to come home immediately. He ran through streets that suddenly felt foreign and hostile, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. When he reached their apartment building, police cars lined the street, their lights painting everything in flashes of red and blue. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering and pointing. Junho pushed through them, taking the stairs 3 at a time. The apartment door hung open. Inside, everything was destroyed. Furniture overturned, walls dented, family photos smashed across the floor. And in the center of it all lay his father. Sung-min's body was twisted at an unnatural angle, his face beaten beyond recognition. Blood pooled beneath him, seeping into the cheap carpet they could never afford to replace. A paramedic tried to stop Junho from entering, but he shoved past. "Dad!" His voice cracked on the word, but Sung-min was gone. The loan sharks had come to collect, and when there was no money to take, they had taken his life instead. The police found Minho in his bedroom closet. The 7-year-old was catatonic, his small body rigid with shock, his eyes staring at nothing. In his hands, he clutched a blood-stained origami crane. He must have been folding it when the loan sharks arrived. Must have hidden when he heard the shouting. Must have listened through the thin walls as they beat their father to death. Junho gathered his brother in his arms, but Minho didn't respond. Didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't even seem to recognize him. It was as if Minho's mind had simply shut down, unable to process the horror of what he'd witnessed. The police investigation went nowhere. The loan sharks had connections that reached into every level of Seoul's power structure. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses recanted. The case was quietly filed away as an unfortunate tragedy, a man who had borrowed from the wrong people and paid the ultimate price. Social services tried to separate the brothers, to place Min-ho in specialized care while Joon-ho aged out of the system. But Joon-ho fought them with everything he had. Min-ho was all he had left. He wouldn't let anyone take his brother away. At their father's funeral, Joon-ho stood over the grave with Min-ho silent beside him and made his first promise. No one will ever hurt us again. Min-ho never fully recovered. The trauma had broken something fundamental in his mind, and despite years of therapy and medication, the shadows never left his eyes. He had nightmares every night, waking up screaming about blood and monsters and closets that trapped him in darkness. During the day, he was quiet and withdrawn, going through the motions of life without really living. Joon-ho, now 17, worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat and pay for Min-ho's treatment. But legitimate work paid slowly, and the medical bills piled up faster than he could manage. That's when he started taking jobs with the criminal organizations that operated in their neighborhood. Small things at first. Deliveries he didn't ask questions about, collections for local bookmakers, standing as muscle outside illegal gambling dens. The money was better, and the people he worked for appreciated loyalty and competence. They taught him how power really worked in Seoul, who controlled where the real decisions got made. Joon-ho learned quickly. He learned how to fight, how to intimidate, how to hurt people efficiently. He learned to bury his emotions, to make himself cold and calculating, because caring about people got them killed. Weakness invited predators, and he would never be weak again. At 17, Min-ho seemed to be doing better. He was attending therapy regularly, taking his medications, even talking about maybe trying school again. Joon-ho, now 24 and rising through the ranks of a mid-level crime organization, allowed himself to hope that maybe his brother could have a normal life after all. Then one evening, Joon-ho came home to find a note on the kitchen table. The handwriting was Min-ho's, neat and careful, just like when he used to label his origami cranes. "Brother, I'm sorry. I can't see Dad's face anymore when I close my eyes. I can only see the blood. You tried so hard to save me, but the truth is I've been dead since that closet. I can't keep pretending I'm alive. I love you. Please don't blame yourself. This isn't your fault. I was just too broken to fix." Joon-ho's hands shook as he read. He ran to the roof of their apartment building, the place where Min-ho used to go to fold his cranes in peace. His brother's body lay on the concrete below, surrounded by dozens of origami cranes that fluttered in the evening breeze like a flock of birds waiting to carry his soul away. Joon-ho stood at that roof's edge for hours, holding the note, understanding that he had failed the one person who mattered most. After Min-ho's death, Baek Joon-ho ceased to exist. At his brother's grave, surrounded by paper cranes that mourners had left in tribute, he made his second promise. "I failed you, Min-ho. I couldn't keep you safe when you needed me most. But I swear on your memory, I will never let another child suffer the way you did. I will become strong enough that no one can ignore me, powerful enough to protect the helpless." He changed his name to Joon-sik Baek, symbolically killing his old identity. What emerged from that grief was something colder, harder, more ruthless than Joon-ho had ever been. Joon-sik rose through Seoul's underworld with terrifying speed. He was smart, efficient, and absolutely merciless to anyone who stood in his way. Within 5 years, he controlled 3 major districts. Within 10 years, he owned half the underground operations in Seoul. He earned the nickname the Ghost because he appeared without warning and disappeared without a trace, leaving destroyed rival organizations in his wake. But even as he built his empire on violence and fear, Joon-sik maintained one unbreakable rule: never harm families, never hurt children. Anyone under his command who broke that rule disappeared permanently. His men didn't understand it, but they learned quickly not to question the Ghost's strange mercy. The GPS showed 5 minutes to destination. Joon-sik's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Another text came through, weaker than the others. "I think I'm going to sleep now. I'm really tired." That message hit Joon-sik like a physical blow. He recognized the tone immediately, had heard it before in his brother's voice during those final years. It was the sound of someone giving up, of a child's body and mind shutting down from trauma and fear, seeking escape in unconsciousness that might never end. "No," he said aloud to his empty car. "Not tonight, not again." His fingers moved across the phone screen while he steered one-handed through increasingly narrow streets. "Stay awake. Talk to me. What's your name?" The response came back slowly, each word appearing like a small act of courage against overwhelming darkness. Areum, my name is Areum. Areum, my name is June. I'm almost there. You need to stay awake for me. Can you do that? I'll try. Good girl, tell me about your dad. What's his name? Hwan De-young. He works at a mechanic shop. He makes me lunch for school every morning. He reads me stories every night before bed. Joon-sik felt something crack inside his chest. This little girl, hiding in terror while her father was being brutalized, was talking about lunch boxes and bedtime stories. She was talking about the kind of normal, precious life that Min-ho never got to finish living. The GPS announced arrival. Joon-sik could see the address now, a modest 4-story apartment building with cracked concrete and flickering hallway lights. Paint peeled from the exterior. Laundry hung from balconies. The kind of building where families scraped by month to month, where violence could erupt without anyone calling the police because everyone minded their own business. He parked across the street and studied the scene. No police cars, no ambulance, no neighbors peering from windows. Whatever was happening inside that 4th-floor apartment, it was happening in complete isolation. Areum and her father were facing this nightmare alone, just as Joon-ho and Min-ho had faced their nightmare alone 15 years ago. Joon-sik checked the weapon holstered beneath his jacket, adjusted his suit, and stepped out of the Mercedes. The night air was crisp and still. He could hear muffled sounds coming from the 4th floor, shouting in a language that wasn't Korean, something breaking, a man's voice pleading weakly. His phone buzzed one more time. They're coming toward the closet now. Joon-sik moved through the building like a shadow, taking the stairs silently. The 4th-floor hallway was empty, but he could pinpoint the apartment by the sounds of violence bleeding through a partially open door. He approached carefully, his footsteps making no sound on the worn carpet. Through the doorway, he could see the destruction. The small living room had been torn apart. Furniture overturned, a coffee table shattered, picture frames smashed across the floor. Children's drawings were still taped to the refrigerator in the adjoining kitchen, bright crayon flowers and stick-figure families that seemed obscene in their innocence against the backdrop of brutality. And in the center of the room sat Hwan De-young, tied to a wooden chair. His face was a mask of blood and swelling, his work shirt torn and stained dark. His head hung forward, barely conscious, while 3 men surrounded him. The men were large, muscular, with the look of professional enforcers. They spoke in Mandarin to each other, laughing as one of them cracked his knuckles in preparation for another round. The lead enforcer, a man with a scarred face and expensive watch, grabbed De-young's hair and yanked his head back. "Where's the money, old man? We've been patient for 6 months. Our boss is tired of waiting." Joon-sik stepped through the doorway. His movement was so quiet, so fluid, that it took several seconds before the enforcers noticed him standing there. When they did, the room went still. The scarred man, whose name was Kang Tae-soo, turned slowly. His eyes widened with recognition, then confusion. "You're the ghost!" It wasn't a question. Everyone in Seoul's underworld knew Joon-sik Baek by sight, even if they'd never met him personally. His reputation preceded him like a physical force. "What's the ghost doing in a place like this?" Joon-sik said nothing. He simply studied the 3 men with the same cold calculation he used to evaluate business rivals before destroying them. He catalogued their positions, their weapons, the layout of the room, the distance between himself and the bedroom where Areum was hiding. Tae-soo's bravado returned, though his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. "This is Cobra Clan territory now. This doesn't concern you." "It does now," Joon-sik said quietly. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried absolute authority. "Tell me about the debt." Tae-soo hesitated, then shrugged, as if sharing information with the ghost was safer than refusing. 150 million won. Borrowed 6 months ago, hasn't paid back a single installment. We're here to collect, one way or another. Joon-sik's eyes moved to De-young, taking in the broken fingers, the defensive wounds on his arms, the way his breathing came in shallow, pained gasps. This wasn't just a collection. This was punishment meant to send a message to anyone else who thought they could borrow from the Cobra Clan and default on payment. "And if he can't pay?" Joon-sik asked. Tae-soo grinned, showing gold teeth. "Then we take what we can, the apartment, his tools, his truck." He paused, his grin widening. "He's got a daughter." "Pretty little thing. There are markets for that. She'd cover the debt and then some." Something shifted in the air. Tae-soo felt it immediately, the temperature in the room dropping several degrees. The casual cruelty in his words hung between them like a death sentence. Joon-sik took one step forward, just one. But that single step carried such concentrated menace that Tae-soo's hand moved instinctively toward the weapon at his waist. "Where is the child?" Joon-sik asked. His voice remained quiet, conversational even, but his eyes had gone completely flat, like black ice with nothing human underneath. Tae-soo tried to maintain his confidence. "Probably hiding in one of the bedrooms. We'll find her after we finish with Daddy here. She needs to learn what happens when people don't pay their debts." Tae-soo jerked his head toward the bedroom. "Check the closets. Kid's got to be in there somewhere." One of his men moved toward the bedroom door. Joon-sik's phone vibrated in his pocket. He knew without looking what the message said. Areum was running out of time, out of hope, out of the desperate courage that had kept her texting a stranger for help. Then, cutting through the tension like a knife, came a small voice from behind the bedroom door. "Daddy." The word was barely a whisper, trembling with fear and confusion. But to Joon-sik, it might as well have been a scream. That single word, spoken in a child's terrified voice, transported him instantly back 15 years. He could see Min-ho in their apartment closet, could hear his little brother's voice calling for their father while lone sharks beat him to death in the next room. Could feel the weight of every promise he'd failed to keep, every moment he'd been too weak to protect the person who needed him most. Something inside Joon-sik Baek shattered. All the careful control he'd built over 15 years, all the emotional walls he'd constructed brick by brick, all the coldness he'd cultivated to survive in a world of violence, it all cracked wide open. What remained was the white-hot core of protective rage that he'd buried the day Min-ho died. Joon-sik moved. The first enforcer, the one heading toward the bedroom, didn't even see him coming. One moment Joon-sik was standing near the doorway. The next, he was behind the man, his arm locked around the enforcer's throat in a chokehold, so precise it cut off blood flow to the brain in 3 seconds. The enforcer crumpled without a sound. The second enforcer fumbled for his weapon, but Joon-sik was already moving. He caught the man's wrist as the gun cleared its holster, twisted with professional efficiency, and the snap of breaking bone echoed through the apartment. The weapon clattered to the floor. A strike to the temple, and the second enforcer joined the first in unconsciousness. Tae-soo had his gun out now, but his hands were shaking. He'd heard stories about the ghost, about how he moved like water and struck like lightning, but seeing it in person was different. Terrifying. "Don't," Joon-sik said quietly. Tae-soo pulled the trigger. The shot went wide by 3 inches because Joon-sik had already moved, closing the distance between them before Tae-soo could compensate for his miss. Joon-sik's hand caught Tae-soo's wrist, bent it backward until the gun dropped, then swept his legs. Tae-soo hit the floor hard, the air exploding from his lungs. Before he could recover, Joon-sik's foot was on his chest, and his own gun was pointed at his forehead. 7 seconds. The entire fight had lasted 7 seconds. Di-young, watching through swollen eyes, could barely process what he'd witnessed. One moment, 3 armed men had been in control. The next, they were incapacitated by a stranger in an expensive suit who moved like violence incarnate. Joon-sik's voice was perfectly calm when he spoke, as if he were discussing a business transaction rather than holding a man at gunpoint. "Tell me about your boss. Who runs the Cobra Clan?" Tae-soo wheezed, struggling to breathe with Joon-sik's weight on his chest. "Chen Wei-long. He operates out of Itaewon. Look, we didn't know this family had protection. We wouldn't have come if we'd known." "You didn't know because they didn't have protection," Joon-sik said. "Until now." He leaned forward slightly, increasing the pressure. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell Chen Wei-long that the ghost paid Hwan Di-young's debt. 150 million won will be transferred to your accounts within the hour. But Hwan Di-young and his daughter are under my protection now. Permanently." Tae-soo's eyes went wide. Protection from the ghost meant complete immunity. No one in Seoul's underworld would dare touch them. "If any member of the Cobra Clan comes within 1 kilometer of this family, I will dismantle your organization piece by piece. Do you understand?" Tae-soo nodded frantically. Joon-sik stepped back, allowing him to scramble to his feet. The 3 Cobra Clan enforcers half-carried, half-dragged each other out of the apartment, leaving a trail of blood and broken pride. The door slammed shut behind them. Silence fell. Joon-sik turned to Di-young, quickly cutting the ropes that bound him to the chair. The man slumped forward, barely conscious but alive. Joon-sik pulled out his phone and made a call. "Dr. Han." I need you at an address in Hongdae. Immediate medical attention, no questions asked, no reports filed. He ended the call and moved toward the bedroom. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle, something that hadn't happened in 15 years. He knocked softly. Areum, it's safe now. My name is Joon-sik. I'm the one you texted. For a long moment, nothing. Then the sound of a small lock clicking. The closet door inside the bedroom cracked open slowly, and Joon-sik got his first look at the girl who had unknowingly reached across the darkness of his carefully constructed isolation and reminded him who he used to be. Areum was tiny, even for 7 years old. She wore pink pajamas with small flowers printed on them, now wrinkled from hours of hiding. Her black hair fell past her shoulders in tangles. Her face was pale, tear-streaked, her dark brown eyes enormous with fear. But despite her terror, despite everything she'd witnessed and endured, Areum looked at Joon-sik and something in her expression shifted. Recognition, relief, trust. She stepped out of the closet, phone still clutched in both hands, and looked past Joon-sik toward the living room. Is my daddy okay? Her voice was stronger than he expected, trembling but not broken. This was a child who had found courage in the darkest moment, who had kept fighting even when giving up would have been easier. Your daddy is hurt, but he's alive, Joon-sik said gently. Laying down to her level. A doctor is coming to help him. You saved his life by being so brave. Areum's lower lip trembled. I didn't know who to call. I just tried different numbers from my phone. I didn't think anyone would answer. I answered, Joon-sik said, and I'm glad you didn't give up. She moved past him then, rushing to her father's side. Daddy! De-young, barely conscious, opened his one good eye and managed a weak smile when he saw his daughter unharmed. Areum, you're safe. You're okay. She took his hand carefully, avoiding his broken fingers, and pressed her face against his arm. I was so scared. They were hurting you and I couldn't help. You did help, De-young whispered. You got help. You were so brave. Dr. Han arrived 20 minutes later, a middle-aged woman with efficient movements and intelligent eyes that asked no questions. She'd been treating Joon-sik and his people for years, understanding that discretion was more valuable than curiosity. She set De-young's broken fingers, stitched the worst lacerations, and treated him for a mild concussion. Throughout the treatment, Areum sat nearby, watching anxiously, refusing to leave her father's side. When Dr. Han finished and left with a significant cash payment for her silence, De-young looked at Joon-sik with gratitude and shame warring in his expression. I need to explain, he said hoarsely. You don't owe me anything, Joon-sik replied, but De-young shook his head. You saved our lives. You deserve to know why we were in this situation. The story came out in broken pieces. De-young's wife, Soo-jin, had been diagnosed with cancer 8 months ago. Aggressive, terminal, but with a slim chance if they could afford experimental treatment. De-young had borrowed money from anyone who would lend, including the Cobra Clan. The treatment had given them 3 more months with Soo-jin before she died anyway. After she was gone, I fell apart, De-young admitted. I started gambling, drinking, trying to numb the pain. The debt grew from 30 million won to 150 million. I kept thinking I'd win it back, but I never did. Areum had been listening quietly, her small hand still holding her father's. Now she turned to Joon-sik with a question that cut straight through all his defenses. Why did you come help us? You don't even know us. The question hung in the air. Joon-sik could feel the weight of 15 years pressing down on him, all the grief and guilt and buried promises. He knelt again, bringing himself to Areum's eye level, and decided to tell her the truth. A long time ago, I had a little brother. His name was Min-ho. He was 7 years old, just like you. Areum's eyes widened. Where is he now? He's in heaven, Joon-sik said, his voice catching slightly. With your mother. When he was your age, bad men hurt our father and Min-ho had to hide in a closet just like you did tonight. I wasn't able to protect him then. It hurt him so badly that he never really recovered. I'm sorry, Areum whispered. Before he died, he made me promise to help other kids when they were scared. Tonight, when you texted me, I realized I'd been breaking that promise for a long time. You gave me a chance to finally keep it. Something profound passed between them in that moment. This small girl, who had every reason to be suspicious of strangers, reached out and took Joon-sik's hand. Her touch was gentle, comforting, as if she understood that he needed healing as much as she did. I'm glad you kept your promise. I'm glad you kept your promise to him, Areum said simply. Those words nearly broke Joon-sik completely. For 15 years, he'd convinced himself that his promise to Min-ho was impossible to keep, that caring about anyone would only lead to more pain. But this 7-year-old girl, with her flower-printed pajamas and enormous courage, had proven him wrong. She'd reached out to a stranger in her darkest moment, and that stranger had answered. Now, holding her small hand in his, Joon-sik felt the last of his carefully constructed walls crumble into dust. What remained was the person he'd been before grief and violence had transformed him. Baek Joon-ho, the boy who had loved his brother and wanted to protect people, wasn't completely dead after all. Joon-sik stood and addressed Di-young directly. "I've paid your debt to the Cobra Clan. They won't be bothering you again, but you have a choice to make now. You can get help for your gambling, rebuild your life for your daughter, or you can continue down this path and lose her forever." Di-young's eyes filled with tears. "I'll do anything. She's all I have left of Sujin. I won't waste this second chance." "Good. I'm arranging a rehabilitation program for you and setting up a trust fund to cover Areum's education and expenses, but I'll be checking on you both regularly. Don't disappoint me, but more importantly, don't disappoint her." 6 months later, Areum stood on stage at her elementary school, wearing a traditional hanbok for the cultural festival. She'd been practicing her dance routine for weeks, and now, as the music started, she moved across the stage with grace and confidence that would have seemed impossible that terrible night in November. In the audience, Hwan Di-young watched with pride shining in his eyes. He'd been sober for 6 months, attending support group meetings 3 times a week. He'd found steady work at a mechanic shop, the kind of honest labor that didn't pay as much as he'd like, but gave him dignity and routine. The apartment had been redecorated, photos of Sujin displayed with love instead of grief. He was learning, slowly, to be the father Areum deserved. And in the back row, deliberately staying out of the spotlight, sat Joon-sik Baek. He wore a tailored suit as always, but his expression was softer now, the hard edges worn away by weekly Sunday dinners and homework help sessions. When Areum's performance ended, the audience applauded. She bowed gracefully, then scanned the crowd until she found Joon-sik. Her face lit up with pure joy, and she waved enthusiastically, forgetting the formal protocol of the moment. After the recital, Areum ran straight to him, still wearing her hanbok. "Uncle Joon, did you see?" "I didn't forget any of the steps." He caught her as she practically launched herself at him, lifting her slightly in an uncharacteristic display of public affection. "You were perfect. Your mother would be very proud." She beamed, then reached into her small bag and pulled out something carefully wrapped in tissue paper. "I made this for you in art class. Teacher said origami cranes represent hope and healing." Joon-sik's hands trembled as he unwrapped the tissue paper. Inside was a delicate paper crane, folded with careful precision. It was the first crane he'd touched since Min-ho's death, the first one that didn't make his chest tighten with unbearable grief. "Thank you, Areum, I'll treasure this." Di-young approached, shaking Joon-sik's hand with quiet gratitude. "Thank you for coming, it means everything to her, to both of us." "I wouldn't miss it," Joon-sik replied. "Same time next Sunday for dinner. We're counting on it. Areum's been planning the menu all week." They walked together to a nearby restaurant, their weekly ritual. Areum skipped between the 2 men, holding both their hands, chattering about school and friends and the upcoming field trip. Joon-sik had cleared his Sunday schedule permanently, much to Jinwoo's bemusement. The criminal empire still operated with ruthless efficiency, but its leader had found something more important than power. Inside the restaurant, they ordered grilled meat and stew, the kind of simple, hearty food that felt like home. Areum pulled out her math homework, and Joon-sik helped her work through the problems while they waited for their meal. She'd struggle with a question, he'd explain it patiently, and her face would light up when she understood. It was ordinary, domestic, everything Joon-sik had convinced himself he could never have. Later that night, after dropping Areum and Di-young at their apartment, Joon-sik returned to his penthouse. Seoul's lights glittered below, the same view he'd had for years, but somehow it looked different now. Less lonely. On his desk sat 2 photographs. The first was old, the edges worn from handling. Young Joon-ho with Min-ho both smiling at the camera before tragedy had torn their world apart. The second was new. Areum's school picture, signed in her careful handwriting. "To Uncle Joon, thank you for saving us. I love you." Between the 2 photos, he placed the origami crane she'd given him. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Areum. "Good night, Uncle Joon. Don't forget, Sunday dinner is at 6 p.m. Daddy is making your favorite noodles. Joon-sik smiled. A genuine expression that still felt foreign on his face, but was becoming more natural with each passing week. He typed his response. I'll be there. Sleep well, Areum. He stood at the window, holding the crane up to the light. Seoul's neon glow filtered through the delicate paper folds, light penetrating what had once been only darkness. Jinwoo had asked him recently if he regretted answering that wrong number text, if the complications of protecting a civilian family were worth the risk to his reputation. Joon-sik had looked at his lieutenant with something approaching pity. That text wasn't a wrong number. It was the universe giving me one more chance to get things right. The ghost, Seoul's most feared crime lord, had learned something that night in November. Power wasn't about how much fear you could inspire or how many enemies you could crush. Real power was having something worth protecting. Someone who trusted you despite knowing what you were capable of. A child who saw past the monster to the man underneath. Somewhere in the city, other children were probably hiding in closets, texting desperately for help that might never come. But Joon-sik's organization had quietly shifted its priorities. Domestic violence cases were met with swift intervention. Human trafficking operations were dismantled systematically. Loan sharks who targeted families found themselves out of business. The Ghost's code had spread through Seoul's underworld. Children were untouchable. Families were sacred. And anyone who violated those rules would face consequences that made death seem merciful. It wasn't redemption, not entirely. Joon-sik knew he could never erase the things he'd done, the people he'd hurt in his climb to power. But Areum had taught him that maybe redemption wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about using your power differently going forward, about keeping promises even when they seemed impossible, about answering wrong numbers from scared children and meaning it when you said, I'm coming. He looked at Minho's photo one more time. I kept my promise, little brother. It took me 15 years, but I finally kept it. The origami crane cast delicate shadows across his desk, a reminder that even the most broken things could be folded into something beautiful, that even ghosts could learn to live again, that sometimes the wrong number turns out to be exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. In a modest apartment across the city, Areum Hwan climbed into bed, her father tucking her in the way he did every night. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad I texted Uncle June that night. Even though it was scary, I'm glad. Di-young kissed her forehead. Me too, baby, me too. She closed her eyes, holding a stuffed animal close, feeling safe in a way she hadn't felt since her mother died. And in the darkness, she whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for connecting her to a stranger who answered when no one else would. Because sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it wears expensive suits and carries the weight of unfinished promises. And sometimes a little girl's courage and a broken man's redemption collide at 1:23 a.m. to create something neither of them expected. A family, not bound by blood but by choice, by a text message sent in desperation and answered with 3 simple words that changed everything. I'm coming! And he had, and everything was different now, for both of them, forever.